evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We wanted to get started. We wanted to start with the name of Allah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. We're going to have this event every week, inshallah, starting today, every Friday, 5:30 p.m. And the goal is really to connect the professionals with the community, help answer questions for people. We have kids in high school, college, trying to figure out how to apply for college, what's the best way to get into a good college. Today, we're going to cover the topic of how to pay for college. That's a topic that's top of mind for a lot of parents and a lot of high school kids as well. So, we're going to have two guest speakers today, Brother Shani Ahmed and Dr. Neha Kumar. Dr. Neha Kumar is running a few minutes behind, but she'll join us shortly. So, I wanted to get started with Brother Shani. Would you mind giving us a brief introduction about yourself?
Sure, no problem. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. So I went to St. John's University. I graduated in 2004 with a bachelor's in pharmacy. Now that's changed into a mandatory 6-year PharmD doctorate degree program. Um, I've worked in the different fields in pharmacy throughout. I worked for Walgreens when I graduated. I currently work in a hospital that centers around mental and behavioral health. I've been involved in other ventures since graduation. I was a partner in a pharmacy that we sold last year. I was a partner in a food-related business that's no longer there. I've done different things, even like flipping houses and stuff like that. And what I found is working on entrepreneurial type projects, it made me look at finances differently than somebody who was just working, and to think more about like strategies like surrounding finances.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And I'll just introduce myself briefly as well. My name is Zohaib Kumar. I'm a CPA. I'm an accountant. I also graduated from St. John's University, like Brother Shani did, and so did Neha. When she joined, she'll tell us a little bit about herself. And I've been working in the accounting profession for about 12 years now. I've worked at some of the big four accounting firms. Now I work with a government regulator called the PCAOB, which regulates all the accounting firms. And I also am an adjunct professor, and I've taught at Baruch College before, and I currently teach at Queens College. So with that, I thought since it's the month of Ramadan, why don't we start with an Islamic related question? Can you share a story or something interesting about your experience while being a Muslim and going to college, whether it was during Ramadan or any other challenges you might have faced and how you overcame them being a Muslim?
So St. John's, I would think that I was very fortunate in that there was a large and fairly active Muslim population there. Our iftars had anywhere from 20 to 70 or 80 people, depending on what day of the week it was. And everyone really had a good time in Ramadan, I have to say. Like, you didn't it wasn't like the way sometimes it is now, where like in the workplace you feel more isolated. You might be the only one fasting, or there's one other person you have iftar with or something like that. So college in that sense can be very unique depending on like the student groups you align yourself with. You can have a very good experience in that regard, compared to like the workforce or other places.
Absolutely, yeah. And then for all the audience members who are joining us through Facebook or through YouTube, we are actively monitoring the comments. So if you have questions while we're speaking about the topic, please feel free to just ask any questions, and we'll stop and try to do our best to address all the questions. And if we don't have time, we'll share the email addresses of the speakers and our general email address, so you can email us any questions that you have as well. So let's start on the topic about on finance, how to pay for college. So one of the biggest problems facing a lot of people is, how do I pay for college? It's this daunting task. You hear crazy figures like 30, 40, $50,000 a year just to go to an undergraduate college. What are some challenges that you or your friends face in terms of thinking about that? And how did you or your friends that you and family members that you know approach that challenge?
Um, so there's a bunch of parts to that. Let's look at them one at a time. I mean, the one of the main things that I think made it easier when I went to school was that tuition was a lot less than what it is now. I mean, you went to St. John's also, Zohaib. I know for pharmacy school, the tuition has approximately doubled since I graduated, and it wasn't, you know, I'm only 16 years out. It's not like salaries have doubled in the last 16 years for anybody that I'm aware of. Um, that's one thing. I had a half scholarship, which helped, and then collectively, like my family helped me to pay the rest. I worked in the summers and the winter breaks as much as I could, and you know, I also employed whatever other creative solutions I could find at the time. I was an intern at Walgreens at the time, and they would give you a tuition check with conditions that, like, you know, for every year that you take it, you either pay it back post graduation or you work for them for 1 year. So it was like a way for them to like retain their talent for cheap.
Hmm.
um Even towards the end, like I started leveraging like good credit where, like, you know, you can have like a 0% on a credit card for like 12, 18 months or whatever, and you start paying it down that way. But it's a big obstacle.
Absolutely.
And the dollar amount being what it is from what it used to be makes it that much more challenging.
Absolutely. Yeah. I remember when I started at St. John's University, the tuition was somewhere between twenty to $24,000 a year. And when I graduated, it went up about $1,000 every single year. By the
Hmm.
end, it was about $28,000 a year.
Yeah.
And now I checked on their website and it was like $36,000 a year now, just for undergraduate education. So, why don't we touch upon some of the topics in this area, like financial aid? Do you have any tips or any knowledge you can share with us about financial aid, what it is, how it works, how do students apply for it?
um Financial aid was always a challenge. I found that for us, my father was a pharmacist also until he passed away. He passed away when I was in my third year of college. It was difficult for us to come by unless there were multiple siblings in college at the same time. Like there was a gap year where it was just me in college, for example, when my brother had already graduated. Those years, because of like what they expect like parents to be able to contribute and uh, the students themselves to be able to contribute, it was rather difficult to qualify. When multiple kids are in college at the same time, you know, because the contribution is divided, financial aid was a little easier to come by. um, of course, it always starts with the FAFSA, and they'll tell you what like your, at the time they called it the EFC, the expected family contribution is. And you know, it goes from there, basically what your tuition is versus like what is the EFC, and you know what the gap is that's left, and then you kind of weigh your options from there.
Absolutely. No, thank you. That's helpful. So I think Brother Shani brought up a good point. He said the starting point is the FAFSA, right? Most colleges, even if you have a scholarship, they require you to fill out a FAFSA as a starting point. FAFSA, the deadline is usually June of the following year. So right now, for this year, I believe they basically give you 12 months. So for the 21-22 academic year, the FAFSA opened on October 1st, 2020. So it's open right now. If you're going to be starting college in the fall, you should have already applied for it, and if not, please do so right away, right? Next, the deadline for that is June 30th of 2022. So next year, you have full 12 months basically to apply for it. But if you read articles about this, you speak to the people in the financial aid office, they'll often tell you the earlier you apply, the better chances you're going to get of having more money because there's a pool of money. It runs out as time passes. So if you're applying at the end, like by when school, a week before school starts, there might not be the full funds available to you as if you had applied earlier. And the other thing people will say is, well, I've heard that there's federal aid, there's state aid, and the state aid is called TAP usually for New York State, but it's all through that one form basically. So you fill out that one form. It's through a standard website. If you just Google FAFSA, it'll come up at studentaid.gov. You apply, you fill out the form. You have to have your parents' financial tax returns with you to be able to fill out some of the information on there. There's some of the, I know when I used to fill it out, it was complicated sometimes to figure out what they were trying to get you to get you to answer. So it's helpful to have someone who's an accountant in your family or in your network who can help you figure out what AGI is, so the other thing to think about with FAFSA is the reminders here are apply early, apply through the website. Many colleges require you to apply earlier. So then they can figure out what your financial package is and then can estimate what your cost is. I know we needed to fill out our FAFSA before St. John's would even tell us, like, all right, this is your contribution that's left. You need to fill that out. Even though, like Brother Shani, I had a scholarship as well, but they said still, we want you to fill this FAFSA out. So that's important. One other thing that people have shared in the past is I don't know if you participate in this, but work study. Have you heard about work study? Or can you
Yeah.
share anything about what that is and how that works?
So I don't have any particular experience with it. I worked a regular job when I was in school. It wasn't like through a work study. I know people who did work study. It was basically where like they worked on campus. A portion of that went to their tuition. A portion was like money that they were paid for like their day-to-day expenses. And it was just another way to help to subsidize the cost of college.
Yeah,
Usually the jobs on campus, people were able to study and stuff like that. It was more, it's not like regular work where the job is very consuming in a sense. But
oh, that's absolutely helpful. Thank you. Um, we had a question come in that said, "What should you do if you don't get financial aid?" Right. Um, Sister Neha, you
Here.
are actually my sister as well.
For what?
uh, we just started talking about the topic of how to pay for college. We discussed financial aid, applying for FAFSA. Can you share information about scholarships?
Sure.
Uh,
I think that when I was applying to college, I think with your encouragement, um, I ended up applying to about, I would say close to 100 scholarships, and then I received, I think they calculated how much money I received overall, and it was more than 100, at least more than $100,000 because I had a full scholarship to the college. And then with all the supplementary scholarships, it all added up. And I would say that scholarships are one of those things that a lot of students don't apply for. So if you take out the time and effort to apply to these scholarships, even obscure scholarships where you're like, oh, it's only $1,000, but those are the scholarships that no one applies for, and you have a really good chance of getting in. And the more you apply, the more you'll get, because I know people who they applied to these obscure scholarships and they just got it because no one else applied for it. So it's a basically big resource that a lot of students underutilize.
that's helpful. Thank you. So usually you'll see things like schools will give you some amount of scholarship based on your grades, which will be based on your SAT score, your GPA getting out of high school, and then there'll be specific scholarships that you can get, that you can apply for privately. So they have a lot of organizations. There's an organization called Islamic Scholarship Fund. If you go to their website, IslamicScholarshipFund.org, they have a few different types of scholarships depending on what you're majoring in, what you want to do. There's also ISNA. ISNA has a few scholarships as well. So if you go to isna.net, you'll see a few scholarships out there targeted towards the Muslim community. Our organization, Muslim Youth Mentors, we try to do a scholarship every 1 or 2 years. It's not a lot of money. Like Nia said, it's $1,000 we usually offer for the first place winner, but it's something, and we're surprised. We only get sometimes like 7, 8, 10 people applying. It's been slowly going up the number of people that apply, but it's again free money that's available to you. All you have to do is fill out the application and spend the time and effort to apply. Usually it involves you filling out a essay and answering a few questions. And it's a numbers game, like Nia said. The more you apply for, the better chance you have of getting scholarships. So I wanted to stop and see, okay, someone asked the question, where can you find scholarships? That's a really good question. So there's a few websites out there. There's an app called Scholy, Scholl. It's a paid app, but there are free versions of those apps. FastWeb and scholarship.com are the two more recognized of the websites out there, and what they do is they just do a broad search across the internet. They have like a database of scholarships, and you'll put in the criteria of scholarship if I'm Muslim, scholarship if I'm a minority, scholarship for this or that, right? Then there's these bigger scholarships that are out there, like the Bill Gates scholarship that's awarded to a handful of people every year, and that covers full tuition. Um, I know JP Morgan has a scholarship that covers your full tuition, and they offer it to 5 to 10 people. I was one of the finalists for that scholarship, although I didn't end up getting it. So I've dealt with that process, and it's a really nice scholarship if you get it. Brother Shine, do you want to share any other information about scholarships?
So I mean, I think that is the majority of it. Sister Neha is correct in saying that like some of them have little to no competition. Like the flow of information is better now than what it used to be. So finding them is a little easier. It's a numbers game. You know, you apply, see what the requirements are, because some grants might want you to, for example, work in an underserved community or do X, Y, and Z. And you should be willing to keep up your end of the bargain if you're taking their money. And if you're
Absolutely.
not, then move on.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's helpful. So, I know when I used to apply for scholarships, they would tell us, there's scholarships for people who are vertically challenged, which means, short. There's scholarships for everything out there, but you have to get your name in the bag, right, to be able to get selected. So they're going to get maybe 100, 200 people that apply. And if everybody's equally weighted, then they're just picking a name out of a hat, essentially. So you have to get your name in there. I think I made Neha set a goal for herself that she used to apply for 3 to 5 scholarships every week, starting in like her junior year. And by the end, she ended up with several thousands of dollars of scholarships just because she applied to so many. And if you talk to anybody who gets a lot of scholarships, that's what they tell you. I just used to apply to a lot of scholarships. It was my part-time job. My dad and mom would make me apply to one scholarship a week. And a lot of them involve just figuring out what the deadline is so you don't miss it, figuring out what you need to write an essay, answer a few questions, whatever the requirements are. It's usually not that complicated. Sometimes you need a letter of recommendation. And the advice there is if it's an essay to write, you have an English teacher in high school, go to your English teacher, have them review your essay for you. They'll usually do it as a courtesy for you, give you some feedback on how to make your essay better. If you need a letter of recommendation, go to your teachers, go to the community leaders like at Hamza Masjid. They can help you figure out how to get the community service if you need it and help you write a letter of recommendation. In our group, we have a number of people who are public officials that we're familiar with, and we can work with them to help you do the community service so you can earn a letter of recommendation as well. So please don't be shy about reaching out about things like that. So we've touched upon the topic of financial aid, right? That's the main source for people who are low income to get the funding to help pay for college. If you don't qualify for financial aid, then you're in the bucket of let's try to get as many scholarships as you can. And then you have the academic scholarships, which your school will give you based on your grades. And then you have all these private scholarships that are out there. Okay. The next topic we wanted to touch on is what are other factors to consider? So let's say you're applying to you got some scholarships, your school gave you a little bit of money, you might have gotten a little bit of financial aid based on your family income. There's a specific formula that's used for state and federal aid. Now you still have a gap, right? Let's say it's $5,000-$10,000 that's still left that you have to pay. Any advice or thoughts, Brother Shani, of what are some things that people can do and parents can do to help bridge that gap?
Say the exact question one more time there.
Sure.
I'm not exactly clear what you're...
How do you bridge the gap? You have a little bit of financial aid. Let's say that school's tuition is $20,000, right? Let's say you have a little bit of aid they gave you. You have some good grades. You have a little bit of financial aid that you got, but it's not going to get you there. You will still have a gap. How do parents and students bridge that gap? Any advice or thoughts?
It's challenging. I mean, the simple answer is any way that you can, essentially. Some people, they do use some form of student debt to bridge the gap. Some people figure out, like, okay, well, this is how much I would need to work, or this is how much I would need to, like, this is what I would need to do to overcome that amount. And, they come up with a plan to do that. In some cases, it involves taking a debt of some sort. In other cases, it's an amount that is more manageable. But in many cases, it affects ultimately the decision of where they're going to go. If they see that in, school A, the gap is insurmountable, versus in school B, the gap is marginal, they tend to favor the more affordable choice, because, the numbers can be very different.
Yeah. So I think that's a really good point. Not everybody needs to go to a school where the tuition is $100,000 a year, right? We have to use our judgment. If you don't want to be in a lot of student debt, many people that end up in student debt, they come to regret it later on. They say, I graduated with $300,000 of student debt. Now I'm stuck working 10, 15 years to pay off that student debt. So one way to avoid that student debt is look at schools that are CUNYs or SUNY schools, right? Uh, those are much more affordable than private schools like NYU, St. John's, um, and they usually will offer discounted tuition for those people who are in school, in state. So that's one route, right? Consider applying to CUNYs, SUNYs. Many people apply to them as backup anyway. So you can consider that alternative. I think Neha had that decision when she graduated. When she graduated high school, you got into NYU, right, Neha?
Yeah.
And they offered you some aid and a little bit of a scholarship, right? But you still had a big gap that was still left over. And can you walk us through the decision process that you decided to go to St. John's versus NYU?
Sure. So I got a full ride at St. John's where everything was going to be covered for the whole 4 years. And I had a considerable amount that I would have to take out loans. And at the time, I knew I wanted to pursue medical school. Usually, for medical school, you have to take out loans. So at that time, it just made more sense, I think, if I was going to pursue loans for graduate school, to not have undergraduate loans. And that's really what made the decision for me. I was like, I'd rather work harder at maybe a school that is a little less prestigious and end up, without any undergraduate loan. And overall, it was the right decision, because if you have kids trying to graduate, you can make it work from any school. So I still think it was the right decision for me. Um, yeah, it's very individual. It really depends on your financial situation. I think people should think about that, because graduate school has a lot of loans as well. So having that debt from undergrad can be very, it can hold a lot of people back.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Um, Other thoughts related to paying for college? I wanted to cover it. Like, I know certain people have shared advice like, hey, you can reach out. There's a payment plan sometimes if the tuition's, let's say, $5,000 and you're able to make it within the semester, they'll allow you to spread it over 2 or 3 payments. So that's one route. I know I used to take that with me and my family. We would have like a few $1,000s to pay, but it's a lot to pay it at once. So they would allow us to spread it out over the semester. So that's one simple route of just spreading out the payments a little bit. Other ways to pay for college that I've seen that are out there there's a program called You Promise. So it's like a rewards program. You link all your like CVS and King Cullen and anyone else who has like reward cards. You link them all up through You Promise. It's the corporations that created this. And the idea is as you spend money, you earn points, and those points are used towards to build a fund for your kid's future. And you buy yogurt or something like that, you earn a certain amount of points depending on the brands that you're buying from. And the idea was to encourage people to save for their kids' college through their regular spending. So that's one thing I've seen out there. But personally, I haven't raised a lot of money by doing that. I don't always shop and buy the right brands, I guess, but I know people who, I know that's a program that's out there. The other option is, I think someone mentioned in the chat, is you can always borrow from your retirement funds. So if you're a parent and you're saying, I have a 401k and I have some money in there, can I use that to pay for my kids' college? The answer is yes, and you can do that through a loan is one route. That's the most tax effective route. Basically, I looked this up, and I would recommend you look this up from your own Islamic guidance perspective. But the concept of a 401k loan is it's money in your own retirement account. You want to borrow some of it from you and switch it to your checking account. Your company will require you to pay yourself back that loan from your checking account to your 401k account, and they'll charge you an interest, which you are earning yourself. I researched this and I found this out, and I said, okay, well, and one opinion that I saw was that it was permissible because you're paying the interest back to yourself. It's not like you're paying it to a company or anybody else. It's moving money from your one account to your other account, and you can spread those payment out over 5 years or 10 years, depending on the company you work for and the rules that they have in their plan. So that's one route of getting money out from your retirement account, and then you pay it right back over a period of time. I know people who, from the Pakistani Indian community, they do something called like committees where they group money together. So everybody puts in $1,000, and you have 10 families every month putting $1,000 aside, and then one family gets the full 10,000 one month, right? And they take turns getting the 10,000. I know people do that. I'm not saying yes or no. Use your own judgment about these things. I know people who have used their friends and family to create accounts, pools of money to help pay for the kids' college, and then they'll pay them back. So those are the one-off things that people do that I've seen. But use your own judgment. There's a lot of risk with borrowing and lending money to individuals. Any other thoughts that you guys have about just other ways of bridging that gap to pay for college, Neha or Shani, that we haven't covered, or anybody else in the audience that you guys want to share?
No, I think that's pretty comprehensive. There's a lot of loans that the government does give that's interest free. So that's something to think about while you're in college. And then you can build up your savings to pay it back over time. But yeah, I think that's pretty comprehensive.
Yeah, I think those types of loans are called grants, right? So you can get a grant, and the concept of those grants are that if you pay it back within a certain amount of time of graduating, you don't start earning the interest. So,
Yeah.
But research those yourselves. I think there was one other topic I wanted to touch upon for parents. This was related to if your kids are young, or even if your kids are teenagers and you want to start putting money aside and you have the ability to put it aside. One tax effective way to save for college is the 529 plan. Every state has a 529 fund usually that they've created. And the idea is similar to a 401k. You can put aside a certain amount of money. There's a limit of how much you can put away every year. And that money, like your 401k, you put it into an account. Every month it gets deducted from your checking account or whatever source you pick. And then it grows by investing it into a safe mutual fund that will grow that money over time. So assuming you're earning a 5 or 10% rate of return over 10 years, over 15 years, you can earn a decent amount of money and let that money grow. So that's another option that we have that parents have that they can use, and you get a tax deduction and the money grows tax-free. So if you started and you put 10,000 away and then it became $15,000, that you don't pay tax on that money. It usually grows tax-free. Someone shared that there is a scholarship. Brother Inti shared there's a New York State Excelsior scholarship as well that's available based on income limits. So that's another scholarship that you guys can look into and research. And then I wanted to share one other thing. I think someone raised the question about mentorship programs for kids in the future. That's exactly what we're going to be doing through this weekly hour. is every week, the first 2 weeks, this week, we're going to cover financial aid, how to pay for college. Next week, we're going to share tips for college success. But every other week after that, we're going to touch on a different career depending on the speaker. So we're going to have careers in IT, careers in pharmacy, careers in physician assistant, careers in medicine, and the professionals will be able to speak about how to become successful in that career and share advice. So it's 6:02. What we wanted to do was open it up for questions. I know you guys have been asking questions, but if anybody has any other questions that they want to ask us, we wanted to open it up and really make this interactive. So let us know any questions you have about this topic or any other topic related to getting into college, paying for college, etc. Oh yeah. So Brother Shani brought up a point. He said related to 529 plans. Their 529 plans have a limited pool of investments you can pick from, mutual funds you can pick from. So you kind of have to know someone or be able to read the documents they provide because each mutual fund invests in stocks or bonds. So you basically have to open up a document called a prospectus. They provide you the copy of the prospectus, read it, and understand where your money is being invested. If you're not comfortable with it being invested in one of the mutual funds that's heavily invested in bonds because that's interest income, you would avoid those options. But there are options like aggressive growth or the growth fund. I've researched it myself. I've looked at the prospectus and seen the underlying investments. And I've seen that I looked up the investments on, there's an app called Zoya where you can look up individual investments and see if they're Islamically permissible or not. So I was able to get comfortable with a few of the investment options there, but it's really up to you. Using your own judgment and your own level of comfort. And there is usually like a cash equivalent where the money kind of sits there, not growing. It just sits as cash. Sometimes you'll earn a nominal amount of interest, which none of us want. But there's like a cash option sometimes in these plans, and then you can just get the tax deduction as a parent. You whatever you put in, you don't pay state income tax on the money you're putting in. That's a benefit that the parents are getting. And the other benefit of a 529 plan is if you send your kids to private school, like Islamic school or Catholic school or any other types of school, you can use the money from the 529 plan that you put in and get the tax deduction for to pay for those programs as well. So my kids go to Islamic school at Hamza Academy, and I put the money in and then I took it out to pay for their tuition. So that's another advantage that people don't realize. And sometimes people think when it comes to 529, what if my kid doesn't go to college? What do I do with that money? There are ways to get that money out, even if your child chooses not to go the traditional college route. Okay. All right. Any other thoughts from you, Brother Shani or Neha, or any other things you want parents and children to think about? There's a question that came in. It says, is there a difference between subsidized versus unsubsidized loans? Any thoughts you guys have on that topic?
So I know that there is a difference. But I don't recall exactly what the terms of each look like, but one was essentially where the government subsidizes the interest so that the principal stays the same until a grace period, after you graduate, in which then it becomes principal plus interest incumbent upon you, versus unsubsidized is it's accruing as you are still in school. And the terms of each are obviously very different and require looking into.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
pretty much it. The subsidized loans, you have to pay it while you're in school usually, and then unsubsidized, the interest starts as soon as you get the loan. That's from what I remember.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And then one other option that I did remember we had in our notes was that for people who have I'm not going to get into whether, mortgages are permissible or not, but I know people who have an Islamic mortgage, there is an option to refinance your mortgage and take some of the equity out sometimes with that and then keep the loan as an Islamic loan. but that's another option that I have seen people throw out there. It's like, hey, I need money to pay for my children's graduate school. How do I get money? Can I take out money from my house? And you do your own research on these topics about Islamic mortgages or traditional mortgages, but that I'm just giving you all the options and things that we've seen that you will see if you research this topic. One topic I wanted to touch upon was that graduate school. So for undergraduate, you get financial aid, but for graduate school, do you get financial aid? Uh, can you guys share thoughts? Like if someone goes to law school or medical school, do you still get financial aid, or does financial aid expire after a certain point? Can you share your thoughts on that?
I know when I was in graduate school, medical school, I did get financial aid. Now, it wasn't as much as you would get an undergraduate, but there was a amount. I believe it was 8,500 every year was a federal subsidized loan where there's no interest at all while you were in medical school, and that you could do yearly. And then there was some financial also offered from the school. Every school is different. There is some, it's just not as much as undergraduate.
Exactly.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, I know that's one thing that's usually shocking to a lot of people. They say, what do I do once I graduate bachelor's? I don't get any financial aid. That's usually the thing that you hear. And it's good to know that there are some resources out there and some special programs and sometimes even like fellowships or scholarships that are specifically designed for graduate school. The other thing I wanted to touch upon and mention for this was for those people who are interested in law school and doing an MBA and a PhD, usually if you get into a PhD program, they will usually cover the full tuition if you're lucky enough to get into like the top PhD programs and be a full-time student. So they will cover your full PhD tuition, but and they'll even give you a stipend of about $20,000 a year, but you are not allowed to work anywhere else and do anything else. They want you to be a full-time student. So I know many colleges offer that if you're going to do a full-time PhD. I've researched it for the area of accounting, but other PhDs might be different. But I have seen in like PhDs for accounting where they will cover your full tuition if you're lucky enough to get in, but they only accept like 5 kids a year for each school, uh, and you get a stipend. They're paying you money to go to school, but that you cannot work anywhere else. And if you're a working professional with kids, a mortgage, it's usually very, very tough. Um, the other thing is, like, I did my MBA at St. John's University. I also got a stipend as part of that. So basically, my full MBA, the tuition was covered. It was based on academic performance. So the grades were good, my test scores were good for the GMAT. And I was able to get into a program within the St. John's MBA program where they covered my full tuition for my MBA, and they also gave me a stipend of a few $100s every month. But the kicker was I couldn't work anywhere else. I had to be a full-time student. So I don't know if you had any other experiences about graduate school like that where you've seen people being able to pay for their way through graduate school.
Well, there is an MD PhD program where there are several like programs across the country, but if you get accepted, then medical school is essentially free. You have to add the 3 years of PhD. And if you have an interest in research, that's a great option because then you don't pay for any schooling. If you don't have interest in research, then you're losing out on 3 years of full-time salary as a physician, so it may not work out to your benefit. But if scholarships and those kind of programs are of interest to you, there are definitely programs out there.
Okay. And then the other thing, I know a lot of a lot of parents want their kids to become doctors, right? Especially in our community. So everybody always asks, well, how do I pay for medical school? It's so expensive. And people, isn't there a program where if you work in low income neighborhoods, your loan gets forgiven for medical school? Can you share any thoughts you have about that?
Sure. I have several friends who've gone through basically you're working in underprivileged areas And after about 10 years total, including your training, so usually training after medical school is 3 to 5 years, depending on what you're doing. And if you stay in a program in a hospital that is affiliated with that sort of program, after 10 years, you just pay the minimum amount every month, which is not that much. It's not restrictive. It's based on your income. And then after 10 years, it's completely forgiven. So because a lot of people, if they're not able to get proper financial aid and they don't have ability, their families can't chip in, then you do end up graduating with $200,000 to $300,000 loans. And that's not easy to pay off. But if you go through that program where you're in a underprivileged area or academic area, then 10 years later, it doesn't matter how much their loans you have, pay the minimum amount every month and it's all forgiven.
Okay. Brother Inti had a point that he shared. He said he was in graduate school and he has a union job, and his union was basically paying him $1,000 a year to help pay for his tuition. Some jobs will pay for your tuition. I know when I was working as an accountant, our company offered us, like even now, they offer us up to a few $1,000s a year to help get a degree that's related to your job. So I know some people who work in finance and large banks or large mutual fund companies, and those companies will pay their work employees to get their MBA because then they become more qualified. So that is another route. If you're working in the business field, certain companies research the benefits that they have. They might subsidize or fully pay for a master's degree for your related field. Okay. And then there was a comment that was shared. Is it helpful to have volunteering or shadowing hours before applying to med school? And how do you go by doing this? So that I think that's directed towards Neha.
Yeah, give me 1 second. I'm just trying to put my phone on the charger. 1 second. Perfect. So yes, having volunteer hours and actual experience working in the medical field it's basically mandatory. Everyone does it. You have to do it. You have to show that you've been in the medical field to some capacity, that you know what you're doing, your interest. Like there's a reason why you want to go for it. So you have to volunteer. It's very easy to volunteer though in colleges. You can volunteer at doctor's offices or hospitals. I volunteered at a closed hospital just for a few weeks, and that was really sufficient. More important than volunteering, because everyone volunteers, you need to have that on your resume, is research. In medical school, you should be part of research projects. The more research projects and publications you have, the more of a more attractive candidate you are. So the more you research and the way you get into research projects is you talk to your professors during your pre-med courses, all your or organic chemistry, chemistry, physics, all those professors, and see if they have any projects that you can contribute to. And they're usually very willing because it's free labor. If you are part of a research project, you're not being paid for it, and they need people to do all the grunt work. And then you get rewarded by being included in the publication.
That's helpful. Thank you. Great. Okay. Are there any other questions? So from the audience, any other things you want us to clarify or speak upon, or any other advice you want to share from your own experiences that the community can benefit from?
I think we go back to talking about scholarships. I think a lot of students are very intimidated about scholarship applications. They feel like it's long, but I just want to reassure that actually some scholarship applications are very short and they don't take that long. And even when there are essays included they're 1 to 2 page essays. And a lot of the time you can recycle those essays. A lot of scholarships want similar essays. So you have to kind of think of it as a time investment. If you sit down and you write a few essays, and you can utilize them for other scholarships and then keep it going, even college applications. College applications also require essays. So the more topics that you have saved in terms of personal essays you've done, the better off you are anyway. It's not a waste of time, and I feel like that's the biggest thing that a lot of students feel like. They're like, well, I'm not going to get this scholarship, I don't have the best grades, But again, you never know what a scholarship is looking for. Sometimes the best grades are not what gets you the scholarship.
Perfect, thank you. So Brother NT shared advice that he shared a fact that his nephew got into a program called Sophie Davis as part of the CUNY for medical school. Can you
Okay.
speak a little bit about that program, Neha? Are you familiar with it?
Yeah, so Sophie Davis is mashallah a great program. Congratulations. It's a program where it's 7 years. Last time I checked, it's college and med school combined, and it's basically subsidized. So the tuition is very low. It's like CUNY, I believe it's CUNY tuition the whole time you're there. And then afterwards, you usually have to work in an underprivileged area for this many years because that's the whole purpose of the programs. They get more doctors in underprivileged areas. If you choose not to work in an underprivileged area, then you just have to pay them $200,000 or $300,000. Overall, it's just, some people just don't want to. But it's a great program. It's very competitive, and financially, it's a great option.
Perfect, thank you. And then that brings up another point about how to pay for college is that you can always work part-time, right, as a student. Like Brother Shani mentioned, he did it. I know I did it. I know Neha did it. So all of us would also work part-time because we know our parents had limited income to be able to provide because me and Neha are siblings. We have two other siblings. Brother Shani mentioned he has a few siblings, so it's hard for parents to cover every full tuition for all of their students. So as a student, you can always work part-time, 15, 20 hours a semester, 15, 20 hours a week, and then throughout the semester, and then work extra during the summers, during the winter breaks, and build up. And that can help at least cover your books. Those can add up to be hundreds of dollars. I know I used to, even like one book for chemistry or like history is like $100, $150 from the publishers. So it goes a long way putting that little bit of effort in, but you have to know yourself. Sometimes students it's like you burn the candle on both sides. They work 40 hours a week at Dunkin' Donuts, odd jobs, and then they're also going to school and they're taking 18 credits per semester. And then they're full-time students, but they're full-time working, and then their grades suffer as a result of it. And then that can affect their ability to get into graduate school, their ability to get into the top companies, because sometimes they look at your GPA as a starting point. So just, you have to find the right balance for yourself and you have to know yourself because sometimes your GPA matters depending on what field you want to go into and what route you want to go. Sometimes it doesn't matter that much. So, be cognizant about that and use your judgment in balancing those things out.
Yeah.
Any thoughts about that?
I think the part-time jobs during college, there's a lot of jobs that are actually you can end up studying while you're on the job. I remember I had several jobs. One of them was just swiping cards at the residence halls. And a lot of that time, that's a very mindless job. And I was able to study for my pre-med courses while I was working. So you kind of have to see, and sometimes that's not as helpful in retail or like fast food. So, and I took a job at a tutoring center, and sometimes no one wanted to come in for tutoring. So there, you have to kind of pick the right job that works for you as well. But you have to know yourself, like you said, Zohaib, in terms of being able to manage your time.
Absolutely. That's very helpful. Brother Shani, you want to share anything on that?
So the only other thing I would add is now there is more pressure on certain companies who have stepped up in terms of paying tuition for particular majors. And, if that is something that interests you, for example, like Walmart, like if you do something in like supply chain management, they will cover a good portion, most if not all, and you can research what the exact numbers are. And other companies have also taken a similar route where they will cover majors that are like relevant to them, I guess you can call it, because obviously they're looking for workers in those areas, and that's a great way for them to get them early, like when they know that someone is very sharp.
Absolutely. And Brother Inti brought up a good point. He in his own experience being in working in government, he mentioned that his company does, his government agency does look at his transcript and the GPA. So it does matter for him. So like we said, do your research, figure out what field you want to go into and how important is that GPA for that. I know in accounting, usually if you want to work at the top firms, you need to have a minimum 3.5, 3.8 GPA before they'll even interview you or look at you, at the big four accounting firms. But once you get in, then no one cares about your GPA. Nobody's ever asked me about my GPA after my first interview and application for the accounting jobs. Um, so there's a question that came in. Is it best to work part-time outside or choose work study in the school? Is one better than the other?
I would say it's situation specific. I mean, I had friends who worked for St. John's full time as employees, and they completed their degrees essentially free of cost. Just it took longer in terms of time, and it's where financial planning is important because money is something we can make over time. Time you don't get back. If it takes you 4 years or 5 years to do what's essentially like a 2-year master's, that time you're not getting it back. So there were different ways to approach it, but of course finances play a big role in those types of decisions, and that's just where financial planning and stuff early on in particular is very important.
Absolutely. And then we're getting close to our end. We have about 7 minutes left, and we want to take a few minutes at the end just to wrap up and do conclusion comments. But so we have 2 minutes before let's wrap up. And in that time, I also wanted to get your thoughts on students who want to get into a good school. They want the name on their resume or their transcript. I graduated from NYU, St. John's. I graduated from a top school. But have you heard of students who go to a CUNY or a community college for 2 years, and then they try to do the last 2 years at a better school, or they try to get into a graduate school that's more prestigious? Any thoughts on that?
I think that, yes, if you can transfer into a better school, then that will help overall your application for graduate school. And I don't know that many people who transfer, to be honest, because it's a little difficult. But I know a few people who did and did work to their advantage. But at the same time, if you're applying for graduate school, you can definitely do very well from any school, from any CUNY school or any basic. CUNY's not basic. There's great CUNY schools. But I think that people have to realize that your overall resume is a lot more than your college name. It's your, publications, your research, at least for medical school, your volunteer experience, your grades, your entrance exam. If everything's amazing, then you're gonna, inshallah, get in, and you won't have difficulty no matter which school you went to. It's all about, balancing out your resume.
Are you telling us you don't have to go to Harvard to become a doctor?
Of course not.
Okay.
So most people I know went to very basic schools and undergraduate did very well. And sometimes it's to your advantage because you're getting better grades at a basic school. Now you're 4.0 GPA that you might not have been able to get at a Ivy League undergraduate school.
Absolutely, yeah. No, that's helpful. Brother Inti brought up a point that one of our former presidents who recently left the White House, he went to Fordham first and transferred to the University of Wharton, Pennsylvania Wharton, a school of business, which is considered Ivy League. So, if he can do it, all of us can probably do that as well, right? The only thing I'll mention about that, the caveat is not all your credits will transfer over, so you'll lose credits as part of that. So the more you transfer schools, the more credits you lose, and then the longer it'll take you to graduate. 4 years turns into 5 years, or more. So just be cognizant about that. That doesn't always work out. Even within CUNYs, like I taught at Baruch and Queens College. I knew students that transferred from Baruch and Queens College, and they're all part of the same network. But some credits, the school would say, we want you to retake Accounting 101 because we want you to learn it our way, So there's all these nuances about that. So do your research before you pick that strategy and realize how much if you will lose credits by doing that. Okay. So I think we're in our last 4 minutes. We wanted to give anybody else who hasn't asked a question to go ahead and share their questions or their comments or their thoughts. But are there any concluding thoughts that either of you guys can share with us?
I think that college can be very daunting for a lot of people, and that you shouldn't let that mentally hold you back from trying to go for the career you want, for the college you want. I think when you apply to colleges, you need to, apply for your dream schools, um, I think it was 222 when I was applying, two dream schools, two schools that are definitely, something that you want to for, and two safety schools. And then figure out the finances as much as you can. You do the best you can, and there's always ends up being a way to pay for college, I think.
Thank you. Brother Shani?
So I would say one bit of advice to any of the parents with young children would be to definitely use the power of like compounding your investments to your advantage. For example, Brother Zohaib, you might be familiar with Bill Ackman, for example. He's CEO of a hedge fund. His idea around poverty in old age is very novel. It was essentially that every child who is born, if you put 6750 in an account for them, left it untouched for 60 years, they would be a millionaire at retirement. Now, obviously, 60 years is beyond the scope of college, but the point is that when you're saving money, time typically is on your side, and the money can compound very quickly. So like, anybody can Google any type of investment calculator, but like real simple math is like, if you started with like a $10,000 a month, a $10,000 initial amount, and you added to it, even like $500 a month, if it grew at anywhere from like 8 to 9%, you would have north of $1 million in 30 years. And then, it's not just about having a dollar amount, it's about having the personal freedom that really offers you. Now you don't have to think about, well, gee, how am I going to pay for this? Or how can I figure out a way to afford that? Now the resources are there, and your limiting factor is just, what do you want to do and what are you capable of? So for the parents with young kids, I would say start early, start small, and just be consistent. It's not like a microwave success option. You don't just put it in for 30 seconds, it comes out and is ready. It's something that like cooks over time. We'll use a food reference around iftar time, I guess.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
And for the kids, I would say don't, have an idea of what you want to do early on. College is not cheap. It's not getting any cheaper. I've seen multiple people lose multiple years in being indecisive, changing their majors multiple times. And it's a very difficult thing for parents to cope with financially for those students who are obviously not covering their own tuition.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So I think that wraps it up. Our hour is up. So we'll give everybody their leave. Wanted to thank Brother Shani and Neha for joining us today. And we are going to share our information, our email addresses, so you can reach out to both of them. They've volunteered to share their email addresses, so you can reach out to them individually. And you can reach out to our general email group, muslimyouthmentors@gmail.com or info@masjidhamza.com, and we'll help try to connect you with people who can help answer your questions. And we look forward to connecting with you guys next week. We'll continue the topic of how to be successful while you're in college. What are things to do to get a good job once you get to college? Okay. All right. Thank you, guys. We'll stop.
Take care, everyone.